He controlled a hotel empire worth $1.8 billion, 17 luxury properties scattered across 3 continents. His name was etched into lobbies made of marble and gold, buildings that grazed the steel gray sky of Chicago's most exclusive real estate. Fortune 500 lists, magazine covers, private jets, a penthouse that occupied an entire floor overlooking Lake Michigan. But tonight he sat inside a cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon, wearing a flannel shirt he'd bought from the Salvation Army for $3.50. His jeans had a hole near the knee, not the fashionable kind, the real kind. His watch cost $9. His shoes were scuffed, and the name he gave wasn't his own. Tonight, he was just Dom, a freelance writer, single dad, barely making rent. And tonight, like every other night for the past 5 months, he was about to be rejected. Now let me ask you something before we go any further. Have you ever looked at someone, really looked, and wondered, do they love me? Or do they love what I can give them? Have you ever been terrified, deep in your bones, that if people saw the real you, stripped of everything you've built, everything you own, everything you've accomplished, they would walk away without looking back? Because that's exactly where Dominic Vale lived, every single day. He had everything the world says should make you happy. Money, power, influence, a name that opened doors most people didn't even know existed. But he carried a secret that no amount of wealth could fix, a wound that no luxury could heal. He was profoundly, devastatingly alone. His ex-wife had left him, not for another man, but for a richer one. Every woman who came after wanted his wallet, not his heart. And his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, the only person on earth who loved him without conditions, was growing up watching her father pretend that none of it hurt. So Dominic did something radical, something most people would call insane. He erased his identity, stripped away the empire, dressed like a nobody, and went on blind date after blind date, 14 of them, waiting, hoping, praying for just one woman who would look at him without a dollar sign in her eyes and choose to stay. 14 dates, 14 failures. But what he didn't expect, what he never could have predicted, was that the woman who would change everything wasn't sitting across from him on any of those dates. She was the one refilling his coffee, and what she saw in him, what she already knew, is going to leave you absolutely breathless. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you believe that real love sees past everything on the surface, past the clothes, past the bank account, past the image, drop a heart in the comments right now. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White, because I promise you, this story is about to take turns you will not see coming. To understand why Dominic Vale would spend 5 months sitting in a rundown cafe pretending to be broke, you have to understand what broke him in the first place. Picture this, a penthouse on the 42nd floor of a building Dominic designed himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched from one end of the living room to the other, framing Lake Michigan like a living painting. Italian marble floors so polished they reflected the sky. Art on the walls worth more than most people's homes. Sculptures, originals, pieces that collectors would auction their reputations for. And silence. That was the thing no one talked about. The silence inside those walls. The way footsteps echoed through rooms that were designed to impress, but never designed to feel like home. The way the refrigerator hummed louder than any human voice. The way the city sparkled 42 stories below, millions of people, millions of lives, and Dominic stood at the glass feeling like the loneliest man in all of it. He hadn't always been this way. 7 years ago, there was Juliana. Juliana with the golden hair and the laugh that made rooms turn. Juliana who told him on their 3rd date that she didn't care about his money, that she'd love him if he were a teacher or a janitor or a man who sold fruit on a street corner. And he'd believed her. God help him. He'd believed every word. They married in Santorini, had Lily 2 years later, and for a brief shimmering window of time, Dominic thought he'd beaten the odds. He thought he'd found the thing that money couldn't buy. Then came the fundraiser, a charity gala downtown, black ties and champagne, and the kind of people who measured their worth in zeros. Juliana met a man there, a venture capitalist named something Dominic couldn't even remember anymore, whose fortune made Dominic's look modest. 2.9 billion to his 1.8, a private island, a yacht with a helipad. And just like that, the fairy tale crumbled. Juliana didn't sneak around. She didn't lie. In some ways, that made it worse. She sat Dominic down one evening, Lily asleep in the next room, the city glittering obliviously outside, and told him with surgical precision, "You gave me comfortable, Dom. He gives me extraordinary." Comfortable, that was the word she used. As if their life, their daughter, their home, their history, was a mid-range sedan she was trading in for a faster model. She signed away custody of Lily without negotiation, didn't fight for weekends, didn't ask for holidays. She packed 3 suitcases, kissed Lily's forehead while the child slept, and walked out of their lives with the same ease she'd walked into them. Lily was 2 years old. She didn't understand where Mommy went. She'd toddle to the front door some mornings and press her tiny hands against the glass, waiting. And Dominic would kneel behind her and hold her and whisper that everything was okay, lies that tasted like ash in his mouth. Now, 3 years later, Lily was 5, brown eyes too big for her face, wild curly hair that refused every brush. She talked to butterflies and named every stuffed animal she owned and fell asleep clutching picture books with her mouth slightly open, breathing the deep, trusting breath of a child who didn't know yet how badly the world could betray you. She was the reason Dominic hadn't given up entirely. She was also his deepest fear, because every time he imagined letting someone new into their lives, every time he pictured trusting again, he saw Lily pressing her hands against the glass, waiting for someone who was never coming back. His mother, Vivian, saw it clearly. She'd raised Dominic alone after his own father left, so she recognized the architecture of his pain, the walls, the moat, the drawbridge pulled permanently shut. "It's been 3 years," she told him one evening, Lily asleep on her lap, a picture book rising and falling on the child's tiny chest. "You don't have to keep punishing every woman who walks through that door for what Juliana did." Dominic heard her. He knew she was right, but knowing and feeling are different countries entirely. And somewhere along the way, Dominic had lost his passport to the second one. So he built a test instead. The idea came to him at 3 in the morning, the way most desperate ideas do, in the dark, alone, staring at a ceiling that cost more to install than most people earn in a year. What if he removed the money from the equation entirely? Not reduced it, not downplayed it, removed it completely. What if he showed up to a date as a man with nothing, no empire, no penthouse, no name, and presented the most vulnerable, unimpressive version of himself he could construct? A broke freelance writer, a single dad driving a beat-up sedan, a man whose most valuable possession was a 5-year-old girl and a heart full of hope. If someone stayed for that, stayed for him, then maybe, just maybe, it would be real. He found a matchmaking service called Kindred Sparks, boutique, exclusive, $4,000 to join, which was ironic given that the version of himself he submitted was a man who could barely afford rent. He created a profile under the name Dom, listed his occupation as freelance writer, uploaded photos taken in ordinary clothes against ordinary backgrounds, mentioned Lily in the 3rd line of his bio, deliberately, strategically, because a child was the ultimate filter. Anyone who ran from the idea of a kid would never survive the reality of one. And then he picked his battlefield. Luca's Cafe on Halsted Street, a tiny place with wobbly chairs and fluorescent lighting that gave everyone a slightly green complexion. The coffee was burned. The pie was worse. The ambiance was non-existent. It was, in every measurable way, the opposite of impressive, which made it perfect, because Dominic didn't want to impress anyone. He wanted to be seen. The dates began. Date number 3, a marketing executive with sharp cheekbones and sharper opinions. She arrived in heels that clicked against Luca's linoleum like a countdown timer. 15 minutes of polite conversation. Then her gaze dropped to his scuffed shoes, traveled to his cheap watch, and something behind her eyes powered down like a light switching off. "I just remembered, I have a work emergency." She was texting her Uber before she finished the sentence. Date number 7, a kindergarten teacher. Sweet, genuine smile. 20 minutes in, the longest anyone had lasted. She asked what he drove. He told her, a 12-year-old sedan with a cracked windshield and a car seat in the back full of coloring books and goldfish cracker crumbs. She developed a sudden and miraculous headache. Date number 11, the one that almost broke him. She was different, warm, engaged, asked about his writing, laughed at his jokes. He felt something stir in his chest, a cautious, trembling hope. Then he mentioned Lily. "I'm not really in a place for kids right now." Her smile stayed, but her eyes left the building. Date number 14, a brunette in a tailored blazer and designer ankle boots. She lasted exactly 11 minutes. A new record, for all the wrong reasons. 14 women. 14 arrivals filled with possibility. 14 departures that confirmed his darkest belief, that without money he was fundamentally unlovable. That his worth as a human being had a price tag, and without it, he wasn't worth staying for. The experiment that was supposed to restore his faith was destroying it instead. Each rejection didn't just sting, it calcified something inside him, turned tender hope into hard cynicism, layer by layer, like pearl forming around a wound. But here's the thing about Dominic's experiment that he never accounted for. He was so focused on the women sitting across from him, arriving, judging, leaving, that he completely missed the one who'd been watching the entire time. The one who'd been refilling his coffee for months, the one who noticed everything, and the one who was about to change the entire trajectory of his life with 7 simple words. She lasted longer than the last one. Dominic looked up from the cold remains of date number 14, the untouched coffee, the empty chair still warm from the brunette's 11-minute cameo, and found Rena Castillo standing beside his table, coffee pot in one hand, an arched eyebrow that communicated more than most people's entire vocabularies. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun that was losing its battle against gravity, a smear of flour on her apron from the kitchen, and eyes, warm, knowing, dangerously perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through every layer of disguise he'd carefully constructed. She was the evening waitress at Lucas, had been for 3 years, and she'd been a silent witness to Dominic's entire ritual of romantic self-destruction without saying a single unnecessary word. Until now. 11 minutes, Dominic said, pushing his cup toward her. Think that's a new personal best. You want the usual? Black coffee and the will to live? Despite himself, despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. Just the coffee. I think the will to live got discontinued. Rena poured without asking. She never asked. That was the first thing Dominic had noticed about her. Weeks ago, maybe months, the timeline had blurred. She didn't ask if you wanted a refill. She just noticed your cup was empty and filled it. She didn't ask if you were okay. She read it in your shoulders, your jaw, the way your fingers tightened around a napkin when a date was going sideways. She noticed, and she moved accordingly, quietly, without performance. Can I say something? She asked, though the tone made it clear she wasn't really asking permission. You keep showing up here looking for something real, week after week, same booth, same coffee, different woman, but you're casting from the same pool every time. She tilted her head. Maybe the pond is the problem, Dom, not the fish. He stared at her. In 5 months of stage disappointments, no one, not his mother, not his therapist, not the matchmaking service that had taken his $4,000, had named his pattern so cleanly, so precisely, so casually. Poetic, he managed. I minored in English. She winked, quick, effortless, without agenda, before life had other plans. A customer at the counter flagged her down, and she was gone, moving between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been carrying other people's orders, literal and metaphorical, for a very long time. Dominic sat there, his terrible coffee growing cold, her words settling into his chest like something warm finding its way home. Maybe the pond is the problem. He drove back to his penthouse that night and stood at those enormous windows overlooking the lake, the city sprawling beneath him like a circuit board of lives and stories. And for the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about another failed date. He wasn't cataloging another rejection. He wasn't reinforcing the walls around his heart. He was thinking about a waitress in a flour-dusted apron who'd told him the truth without flinching, who'd looked at his pattern of pain and called it what it was, not with judgment, but with a kind of clarity that felt almost tender. And he was thinking about the fact that she was absolutely, unquestionably right. Now I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever met someone who saw right through you, not to judge you, not to use it against you, but to genuinely understand you, type real one in the comments below, and make sure you've hit that like button. Because this story is about to go somewhere you are not expecting. Trust me on that. Over the next month, something shifted in Dominic's routine. He stopped scheduling blind dates. No more kindred sparks profiles. No more carefully curated candidates arriving in designer shoes to evaluate his net worth over burnt coffee. He canceled his membership without a second thought. $4,000 he'd never get back, and somehow the cheapest lesson he'd ever learned. But he didn't stop coming to Luca's. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4, always during Rena's shift. He'd claim his usual booth in the corner, open his laptop, and pretend to write, fingers moving across keys without producing anything coherent, while really, secretly, he was waiting. Waiting for her 15-minute breaks, when the dinner rush thinned, and Rena would slide into the chair across from him, exhale like she was setting down something heavy, and talk. God, the way she talked. Not about surface things, not weather, not small talk, not the polite verbal wallpaper that most people use to fill silence. Rena talked about things that mattered, with a directness that should have been intimidating but instead felt like oxygen. He learned her in fragments, the way you learn a song, not all at once, but note by note, until suddenly the melody is living inside you and you can't remember a time before it. She was 29. Grew up on the south side of Chicago, the eldest child of a mechanic named Hector Castillo, who had grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and a laugh that could fill a room. Hector worked 60-hour weeks at a shop on Archer Avenue, oil changes, brake repairs, transmissions, hands that built and fixed and held his children with equal tenderness. He died when Rena was 21. Heart attack. Dropped right there on the shop floor between a Honda with a bad alternator and a Ford with a leaking gasket. No warning, no goodbye. Just there one moment and gone the next, leaving behind a wife whose health was already failing and 2 children who suddenly had to grow up faster than nature intended. Rena's mother, Gloria, had been diagnosed with a degenerative neurological condition a year before Hector's death. The kind of illness that didn't kill quickly. It erased slowly, stole mobility in inches, turned simple tasks into daily battles. Gloria could still walk, but each year the distance shortened, the steps grew more uncertain, the cane bore more weight. And then there was Mateo, 16 years old, Rena's younger brother. Quiet in the way that brilliant people sometimes are, not shy but internal, processing the world through equations and theories rather than words. He spent his evenings in the back booth at Luca's, hunched over textbooks, working through advanced calculus problems that would have stumped most college students, while his sister cleared tables and poured coffee 10 feet away. "Why this cafe?" Dominic asked one evening, genuinely curious. "You're smart, you're fast, you're good with people. You could make twice the money at a downtown restaurant." Rena didn't hesitate. "Luca gave my dad free meals when we couldn't afford groceries. When things got really bad, really bad, like choosing between electricity and food bad, Luca would pack brown bags and leave them on our doorstep. Never said a word about it. Never made us feel small." She paused, adjusting the pen behind her ear. "When Dad died, Luca gave me a job. No experience, no questions, no interview. Just handed me an apron and said, 'You start Monday.'" She looked around the cafe, the wobbly tables, the buzzing lights, the cracked vinyl booths, with an expression that Dominic recognized immediately, because it was the same way Lily looked at her favorite stuffed animal. Not admiration for beauty, love for something that had been there when it mattered. "You don't leave people like that," Rena said simply. "Loyalty and survival, they're the same thing when you grow up the way I did." One night, during a break that stretched 5 minutes longer than it should have, Rena pulled a small sketch pad from her apron pocket. She was always drawing during downtime, quick portraits in ballpoint pen, capturing faces with a few confident strokes. "You showed me that photo last week," she said, not looking up. "The one of Lily at the zoo, with the butterfly on her finger?" "Yeah." She turned the pad around. She'd drawn Lily. Not a photographic reproduction, something deeper, something that bypassed the surface entirely and went straight to the essence. The stubborn set of her jaw, the wildness in her curls, the light in her eyes, that defiant, joyful, unbreakable light that Dominic saw every morning when his daughter climbed into his bed and announced that today was going to be the best day ever. No photograph had ever captured what Rena captured with a $2 pen and a napkin-sized sheet of paper. "This is..." Dominic started, but the words caught somewhere between his chest and his throat. "Keep it," Rena said softly. "Every kid deserves to be seen. Every kid deserves to be seen." 5 words. And somehow they rearranged something fundamental inside him, shifted furniture in a room he'd kept locked for years. That night, Dominic pinned the drawing to his refrigerator. Right there, beside Lily's crayon masterpieces, the stick-figure families and lopsided suns and houses with too many windows. Rena's sketch looked more at home there than any of the $1,000,000 paintings hanging in his hallway. He stood in his kitchen, barefoot, penthouse silent, the city sleeping 42 stories below, and felt something he barely recognized anymore. Hope. Fragile, terrified, but unmistakably, stubbornly alive. Hope, for a man like Dominic, came with a shadow, because he'd hoped before. He'd hoped with Juliana, hoped so completely that when she left, The collapse nearly buried him. And the scars from that collapse had taught him something brutal. Trust, but verify. Feel, but protect. Open the door, but check what's on the other side first. So he hired a private investigator. He hated himself for it. Sat in his home office staring at the phone for 20 minutes before making the call, his stomach turning with the hypocrisy of it. Here he was, a man hiding his entire identity, paying someone to investigate whether the woman he was falling for was also hiding hers. But he needed to know. Was Rena playing a longer game than the others? Had she somehow discovered who he really was, and was she performing a more sophisticated version of the same act? Patience instead of greed, long game instead of short. He'd been wrong before. Catastrophically wrong. And this time, it wasn't just his heart at stake. It was Lily's. The report came back in 4 days. Rena Castillo, exactly who she claimed to be. Every detail confirmed. Student loans from 2 years of community college. English major never finished. 2 jobs. Luca's in the evening, a framing shop on the north side 3 mornings a week, a rent-controlled apartment in Pilsen, raising Mateo, caring for Gloria, no criminal record, no hidden accounts, no connections, none whatsoever, to Dominic's world. No possible way of knowing that Dom, the broke freelance writer with the scuffed shoes and the $9 watch, was Dominic Vale, CEO of Vale Hospitality Group, worth $1.8 billion. Something loosened in his chest as he read the report. Not just relief, something deeper. Confirmation, not of Rena's innocence, but of something far more precious. What was growing between them was real, untainted, built on nothing but 2 people sitting across from each other in a bad cafe under bad lighting, telling each other the truth. Or at least, Dominic thought, the guilt twisting, one of them was telling the truth. It wasn't planned. None of the important things ever are. Dominic's mother had a doctor's appointment she couldn't reschedule. His nanny called in sick with a fever. And Lily, 5 years old, curious about everything, especially the mysterious place her father disappeared to several nights a week, looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes and said something that dissolved every objection he might have raised. "Can I come to your secret place, Daddy? I want to see where you go." So he brought her. They walked into Luca's at 6:15 on a Tuesday, Lily's hand wrapped entirely around 2 of his fingers, her head swiveling to take in the wobbly tables, the buzzing fluorescence, the chalkboard menu with its misspelled specials. To Dominic, Luca's was a stage for his experiment. To Lily, it was an adventure. Rena spotted them the moment the door opened. And here's what Dominic noticed. What he would remember long after the rest of the evening blurred into warmth and pie and crayon drawings. Rena didn't perform. There was no calculated warmth, no trying to impress the single dad energy, no theatrical display of kid-friendliness designed to win points. She simply walked over, knelt to Lily's height, not bending down from above, but actually kneeling, putting herself at eye level, and smiled the way morning light enters a room, naturally, without effort. "Well, you must be the famous Lily. Your dad talks about you so much, I feel like I already know you." Lily studied her with the devastating honesty that only children possess. No social filters, no polite pretenses, just raw assessment. "Do you have pancakes?" Lily asked. "We have the best pancakes in Chicago. Chocolate chips or blueberries?" "Both." Rena's smile widened. "A woman after my own heart. Come on, I'll let you help me carry the syrup." Dominic watched from the booth as Rena navigated the evening with Lily, bringing extra napkins before they were needed, providing crayons that materialized from nowhere, drawing a tiny butterfly on the corner of the placemat that made Lily shriek with delight so pure it turned every head in the cafe. There was no strategy here, no performance, just a woman being kind to a child because kindness was her native language, the tongue she'd been raised in, the one she'd never lost despite every reason life had given her to become hard. An hour later, Lily crashed. Full of pancakes and warmth, she slumped against Dominic's arm and was asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and even, her small hand still clutching a crayon. Rena slid into the seat across from them, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She's wonderful, Dom, truly. You've done something incredible raising her. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together." Rena tilted her head. "That's what all the good parents say. The ones who don't worry are the ones you should worry about." A moment passed. Quiet, warm, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling because it's already full. Then Rena's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She glanced at the screen and something dark passed across her face, fast, like a cloud swallowing the sun. Her jaw tightened. She shoved the phone back into her apron like it had burned her. "Everything okay?" Dominic asked. "Fine." A smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I should get back." She was gone before he could press further. But Dominic had spent enough time studying people, reading boardrooms, decoding investors, anticipating betrayal, to recognize when someone was carrying a weight they hadn't put down yet. Something was wrong, and it gnawed at him the entire drive home, Lily asleep in her car seat behind him, the city lights streaming past like unanswered questions. It took 1 week for whatever shadow had crossed Rena's face to swallow her entirely. She arrived for her shift on a Thursday evening looking like a different person. Red eyes, hands that trembled so visibly she dropped a plate of hash browns within the first 10 minutes, ceramic shattering across the floor like a small explosion. She swept it up quickly, apologized to no one in particular, and kept moving, but the cracks were showing, widening with every hour. Dominic waited. He nursed his coffee through the dinner rush, watching her carry trays and force smiles and hold herself together with the brittle determination of someone who knows they're one deep breath away from collapse. When the cafe finally emptied, 9:30, the last customer leaving with a to-go bag and a wave, Dominic moved to the counter. Rena stood behind it, gripping the edge with both hands, head bowed, breathing in controlled, measured pulls, like she was rationing her own oxygen. "Talk to me," he said. "Dom, I can't." "Yes, you can. Whatever it is, you can." It came out in pieces, broken fragments of sentences that she had to force past the tightness in her throat, each one costing her something. Gloria's treatment, the specialized therapy that had been keeping her condition from accelerating, had been reclassified by their insurance provider. One word: experimental. A single administrative decision made by someone in an office who had never met Gloria Castillo, never watched her grip the kitchen counter to stay upright, never seen the fierce pride in her eyes as she refused to let her children see her struggle. Experimental meant not covered. Out-of-pocket cost, $43,000 for 6 months. Without it, the doctor said, Gloria would lose the ability to walk within a year, maybe less. And that wasn't all. Mateo, brilliant, quiet 16-year-old Mateo, had been accepted into a summer research program at Northwestern. Neuroscience, full funding, the kind of opportunity that could reshape an entire trajectory, turn potential into pathway, open doors that kids from the South Side didn't even know existed, except for a $3,000 equipment fee that appeared in the acceptance letter like a landmine buried in fine print. Mateo told Rena he wouldn't go, said he'd get a job instead. Help with Mom. Rena's voice cracked like a window hit by a stone. He's 16, Dom, 16. He should be worrying about prom, about girls, about whether his jump shot is good enough for the school team, not about whether his mother can walk. She pressed her palms flat against the counter, steadying herself, refusing to collapse even as everything inside her was giving way. I work 70 hours a week, 70, and I can't cover this. I can't fix this. What kind of sister, what kind of daughter? She stopped, swallowed. What kind of person lets the people she loves down like this? Dominic sat there and felt the weight of his hidden fortune pressing against his ribs like a physical force. A pressure so intense it bordered on pain. He could end this. Right now. This second. He could pull out his phone, make a single call, and $43,000 would appear in Gloria's treatment account before Rena finished her sentence. He could fund Mateo's program 10 times over and never notice the difference in his accounts. He could erase every line of worry from Rena's face with 6 words. Let me take care of it. But he'd been here before, standing at the intersection of money and love, watching one destroy the other. He'd seen what happened when the checkbook came out, how gratitude curdled into obligation, how generosity built cages disguised as gifts, how the person you loved slowly transformed into someone who owed you something, and how that debt poisoned everything it touched. If he revealed himself now, if he swooped in as the billionaire savior, he would never for the rest of his life know whether Rena's feelings belonged to him or to his bank account. He would spend every future moment wondering, was that smile for me or for my money? Did she stay because she loves me or because she owes me? He couldn't survive that question again. Not after Juliana. Not with Lily watching. The hardest thing Dominic Vale ever did wasn't building an empire. It wasn't surviving betrayal. It wasn't raising a daughter alone. It was sitting across from a woman he was falling in love with, watching her heart break in real time, and choosing not to reach for his checkbook. Let me ask you something right now. What would you have done? If you had the power to take away someone's pain in an instant, but using that power might destroy the only real thing you've ever had, would you reveal yourself? Would you risk it? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if this story has you on the edge of your seat, if you're feeling this the way I think you are, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Send it to that person who understands what it means to love someone and be terrified at the same time. Dominic drove home that night and did not sleep. He sat in his home office, the room with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the mahogany desk and the silence that usually felt like a punishment, and he worked until dawn. Not on business, not on deals or acquisitions or quarterly projections, on Rena's family. He was methodical, precise. Every action untraceable, every connection routed through intermediaries and proxies and layers of deliberate anonymity. First, he contacted 7 medical foundations that specialized in neurological conditions. Through an intermediary, a lawyer who owed him a favor and asked no questions, he flagged Gloria Castillo's case to 3 of them, emphasizing the insurance reclassification and the urgency of continued treatment. Second, he reached out to a patient advocacy nonprofit that specialized in insurance appeals. Dominic knew, from years of navigating bureaucratic systems at the corporate level, that experimental was often a classification of convenience, not science. Insurance companies used it to deny coverage they didn't want to pay for. A skilled advocate could challenge it. Third, he placed a quiet call to an old friend, Dr. Amara Osei, a neurologist at Northwestern Memorial who'd consulted on a building project for him 3 years ago. Not as a favor to Dominic Vale, Billionaire, as a professional colleague who might genuinely see a path forward in Gloria's case. Fourth, he routed an anonymous donor recommendation to the Northwestern Summer Research Program Director, Mateo Castillo. Full equipment sponsorship. The recommendation was structured to look like it came from a general diversity and STEM foundation, not a specific individual. 4 actions. 4 invisible threads pulled from behind a curtain that Rena would never see. And then came the hardest part, waiting. 12 days. 12 days of driving to Lucas and sitting in his usual booth and watching Rena carry a weight that was slowly, visibly breaking her. 12 days of conversations where she tried to smile and couldn't quite manage it, where her laughter came out thin and fragile, where she refilled his coffee with hands that still trembled. 12 days of knowing that the solution was already in motion, that help was coming, that the foundations were reviewing and the advocate was filing and the gears were turning. But he couldn't tell her. Couldn't even hint. Because the moment he did, the curtain would fall, the disguise would shatter, and everything they'd built in this terrible, wonderful cafe would be contaminated by the one thing he'd spent 5 months trying to remove from the equation: money. Each day his secret felt less like protection and more like cowardice. Each day the distance between kindness and deception grew thinner, until he could barely tell them apart. But he held the line. Because some gifts have to arrive without a return address. Some help has to come from nowhere, from the universe, from luck, from the invisible generosity of a world that sometimes, against all odds, gets it right. That was the only way it would be real. For Rena, for him, for whatever was growing between them. On the 13th day, Rena came through the kitchen doors like a woman reborn. There was light in her step, not the careful, measured movement of someone conserving energy, but the buoyant, almost floating stride of someone who'd been carrying sandbags and had suddenly, inexplicably, been set free. Her eyes were bright, not red, not swollen, bright. She spotted Dominic in his usual booth and made a straight line toward him, weaving between tables without even glancing at them, and before he could say a word, she grabbed both his hands across the table and held them so tightly he could feel her pulse hammering against his fingers. "Dom, you won't believe what happened." He felt his heart climbing into his throat, but kept his voice steady. "Tell me." The insurance appeal, it went through. Some patient advocacy group took Mom's case pro bono, challenged the experimental classification and won. The treatment is covered again. Her words tumbled out, fast and bright and breaking. And then, out of nowhere, a foundation offered supplemental funding for patients in exactly Mom's situation. Between the insurance reversal and the grant, the out-of-pocket dropped to almost nothing. Dominic squeezed her hands. "Rena, that's... Wait, there's more." She was almost laughing now, tears forming at the edges but not falling. Northwestern waived Mateo's equipment fee. The entire cohort got sponsored by some anonymous donor. Mateo called me from school, and I could hear it in his voice. "Dom, this kid who never gets excited about anything. He was shaking. He said, "Does this mean I can go?" And I said yes. I said yes. The tears fell then. Not sad tears. The other kind. The kind that come when the fist you've been holding inside your chest for weeks finally unclenches and everything you've been holding rushes out at once. Dominic felt warmth flood through him. Genuine, unperformative warmth. Not the satisfaction of a billionaire solving problems with money. Something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with his bank account and everything to do with the look on this woman's face. The relief. The joy. The way her grip on his hand said, "I don't know how this happened, but I'm not letting go." "It's like someone out there was watching over us," Rena whispered. "Maybe someone was," Dominic said softly. She looked at him then. Really looked. The way she'd looked at him that very first night, past the flannel shirt and cheap watch, past the disguise, straight to whatever truth lived behind his eyes. And then she said the words that stopped his heart. "Dom, did you do this?" He opened his mouth. The lie was right there, rehearsed, familiar, automatic. He'd been wearing it for 5 months. It fit like a second skin. "I'm a broke writer, Rena. I can barely cover my own rent." Silence. 1 second. 2. 3. "No," Rena said quietly. "You're not." The air between them changed. Became charged. Fragile. The kind of silence that feels like standing on the edge of something very high and looking down. Rena released one of his hands and reached into her apron. She pulled out a folded page, glossy, creased from being carried for days. She unfolded it and placed it on the table between them. A business profile from Crane's Chicago Business Magazine. A full-page photograph of a man in a $3,000 suit standing in front of a flagship hotel with the word Vail etched in gold above the entrance. The man in the photograph was the man sitting across from her. "Lily drew a picture at school," Rena said, her voice steady despite everything trembling underneath. Her teacher posted it on the class page. It was a building, tall, with lots of windows, and underneath it, in her little 5-year-old handwriting, she wrote, "My daddy's hotel." Dominic felt the ground shifting beneath him. Slowly, irreversibly. "I wouldn't have thought anything of it," Rena continued. "Except the building she drew had a very specific logo. I've walked past that hotel 100 times, Dom. I recognized it, so I looked it up." She tapped the magazine page. "And I found you, the real you." His throat was dry. His hands were cold. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The words came out hollow, and you didn't say a single word. "No." Rena's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't. I wanted to see what you'd do." The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Halsted Street. "I wanted to see," Rena said slowly, each word deliberate, chosen, "whether you'd use your money to manipulate me, whether you'd swoop in with a check and make me owe you, whether you'd turn my family's pain into your leverage." She paused, let the weight of it settle. "You didn't." Another pause. Longer. "You helped my mother and my brother without revealing yourself, without putting your name on it, without making me feel small or indebted or bought. You found a way to help that let me keep my dignity. Do you understand how rare that is, Dominic? Do you have any idea?" The sound of his real name in her mouth. It landed like a key turning in a lock he'd forgotten he'd sealed. "You're not angry?" He whispered. "Are you angry that I knew and didn't say anything?" Rena countered gently. "We were both hiding, both testing, both terrified of being wanted for the wrong reasons. We were two people standing on opposite sides of a wall, peeking through the cracks, hoping the person on the other side was real." She leaned forward. "Here's what I learned, Dominic. The man who sat in this booth for 5 months, eating terrible pie and drinking burned coffee and leaving $100 tips he thought I wouldn't notice. You notice the tips? I'm a waitress, Dominic. I notice everything. You tipped $40 on a $3 coffee, repeatedly. I had to hide the receipts from Luca because he would have thought I was skimming. Despite everything, the fear, the exposure, the vertigo of being fully seen, Dominic almost laughed. "That man," Rena said, her thumb tracing a slow circle on his knuckle, who dressed down and showed up and let himself be rejected, week after week, who brought his daughter to a rundown cafe because he trusted me with the most important person in his life, who helped my family, without needing a single word of credit. That man is who you are, billionaire or broke, penthouse or this booth, that's you." Rena held his gaze with an intensity that left no room for performance, no room for the masks he'd worn for years. The confident CEO, the calculated dater, the charming alias named Dom. She'd seen through all of it, and she was still sitting here. "I don't want your money, Dominic." She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed in your head 1,000 times and finally get to release into the world. Not practice, but certain. I want the man who lit up like a sunrise every single time he talked about his daughter, who described Lily's laugh like it was the greatest sound ever created. I want the man who sat in this cafe week after week getting rejected by women who couldn't see past a cheap watch and came back anyway, because he hadn't given up on finding something real. Her voice dropped, not quieter, deeper. I want the man who found out my mother was losing her ability to walk and my brother was about to lose his shot at a future, and instead of writing a check and taking a bow, he worked through the night to find a way to help that didn't have his name on it, that didn't come with strings, that didn't make me a charity case. She shook her head slowly. That's not wealth, Dominic. That's character. And character is the only currency I've ever respected. Dominic felt something break open inside him. Not violently, not the way Juliana had shattered him, leaving wreckage and debris. This was different. This was the way ice breaks in spring. Slowly, gently, releasing everything that had been trapped beneath. The grief, the fear, the desperate hope he'd been too terrified to fully feel. Most people change when they find out, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Most people become performers. Most people aren't me. 4 words, and in them, an entire future. Rena glanced at the clock above the kitchen door. My shift ends in 10 minutes, and I think it's time you took me somewhere that isn't this cafe, somewhere you don't have to pretend. What if I like pretending? You don't. Her gaze softened, not with pity, never pity, with recognition. You're exhausted from it. You've been exhausted since the first night I poured your coffee. I could see it in your shoulders, in the way you held your cup like it was the only thing keeping your hands from shaking. She stood up, untied her apron, and folded it on the table between them. Be yourself, Dominic, the real one. I've been waiting for him. 10 minutes later, they stepped out of Luca's and into the November night. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of wet pavement and distant lake water. The street was quiet, that particular Chicago quiet that settles over neighborhoods after the dinner crowd disperses, when the city takes a breath between its daytime hustle and its nighttime pulse. A black sedan idled at the corner. Dominic's driver, a patient, good-humored man named Ray who had been parking discreetly around the block for 5 months without complaint, saw them emerge and pulled smoothly to the curb. Rena stopped, looked at the car, looked at Dominic, and burst out laughing. How long has that poor man been circling the block? Since day one. Day one, Dominic Vale, you are the most ridiculous billionaire on the entire planet. I prefer committed to the role. She climbed in, still laughing, and something about the sound of it, unguarded and free and rolling through the car like music, made Dominic believe, for the first time in years, that maybe the world wasn't entirely built on transactions. Maybe somewhere between the price tags and the profit margins and the performance, there was still room for something that couldn't be bought or sold or leveraged. Something that simply was. 5 months later, on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, Dominic returned to Luca's. But this time, every table held candles. The wobbly chairs had been steadied. The fluorescent lights had been dimmed, or maybe replaced. Rena would later discover that Dominic had hired an electrician specifically for this purpose, a detail so absurdly extra that she would tease him about it for years. Lily stood by the counter in a yellow dress, holding a hand-painted sign in her careful 5-year-old letters, "Say yes, Rena." Mateo sat in his usual back booth, pretending to study, grinning behind his calculus textbook. Gloria was there too, walking, slowly, with her cane, but walking. Tears already streaming down her face before Rena even entered the room. And Luca himself, the old man who had fed a family when they were hungry, who had hired a grieving girl and asked no questions, stood behind the counter with his arms folded, nodding slowly, as if he'd known this was coming all along. Dominic got on one knee. He didn't hold out a ring box from a designer jeweler. He held out a folded napkin, creased and soft from being carried for months. The same napkin Rena had sketched Lily's portrait on. The one that still hung on his refrigerator. The one that had started everything. On the back he'd written 5 words in his own handwriting. No calligrapher, no gold leaf, just a pen and a truth. You saw me before anyone else did. Let me spend the rest of my life being worth what you saw. Rena didn't let him finish. She pulled him to his feet, took his face in both hands, and kissed him, while Lily cheered and Mateo pretended to gag, and Gloria pressed her hands over her heart and Luca quietly wiped his eyes with a dish rag. They married 4 months later, in Luca's cafe, the same cafe that Dominic's development company had at one point identified as a prime location for a boutique hotel. He'd killed the project the night Rena drew Lily's face on that napkin. Some buildings held more value than any balance sheet could ever calculate. The guest list was beautifully absurd. Tech executives sat beside Southside neighbors. Board members shared tables with art students and line cooks. A venture capitalist who managed a $12 billion fund found himself in a passionate debate about deep dish pizza with Luca, who had never heard of venture capital and did not care to learn. Lily served as both flower girl and ring bearer because she had insisted on both jobs, and no one in the building, including her billionaire father, had the courage to tell her no. At the reception, as Dominic danced with Gloria, slowly, carefully, her cane set aside for 3 minutes of gentle swaying, Matteo found Rena standing by the counter, watching. "How'd you know?" he asked. "That he was the one?" Rena didn't answer immediately. She looked across the room at Dominic, crouched now beside Lily, straightening the flower crown in her hair, listening to something his daughter was saying with the focused attention of a man who understood that this small, ordinary, unremarkable moment was the whole point of everything he'd built. "Because he chose to be ordinary," Rena said. "When the entire world was telling him he was extraordinary, he sat in a cafe and ate bad food and wore thrift store clothes and let himself be nobody. Just so he could find someone who'd love him as nobody. That takes more courage than building 100 hotels." She paused. "And because he helped our family without ever needing us to know. That's not generosity, Matteo. That's love before it has a name." Across the room, Dominic looked up. His eyes found hers, like they always did, like some internal compass that always pointed the same direction. He smiled. Not the polished smile from magazine covers or boardroom presentations. The other one. The uncertain, searching, vulnerable one. The one that said, "I still can't believe you're real." The one that had always been just for her. Rena smiled back. Money hadn't brought them together. It had been the thing he'd hidden, the wall he'd built, the obstacle he'd placed between himself and every person who might get close enough to hurt him. For 5 months, he'd used poverty as a test and wealth as a secret, believing that the truth would ruin everything. But Rena had looked past the disguise in both directions, past the poverty he performed, and past the fortune he concealed, and found the person underneath. Not the billionaire, not the broken man, just Dominic, lonely, terrified, desperately hoping that someone, somewhere, would see him for who he actually was and choose to stay. She stayed, not for the penthouse, not for the empire, not for the name on the skyline, for the man who left ridiculous tips on $3 coffees, for the father who talked about his daughter like she hung the stars, for the quiet, stubborn soul who sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights night after night and let himself be seen. That was the fortune that mattered. That was everything. If this story reminded you that love isn't about what you have, it's about who you are when no one is watching, then do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Infinite Love Tales by Mr. White so you never miss a story like this one. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what's more important in a relationship, what someone can give you, or who they are when the world isn't looking. I'll be reading every single response. Until next time, stay real, stay kind, and never stop looking for the person who sees you